Hey there, Empowered Tribe. It's Angela T. Moore. You're getting ready to experience the next episode of Empowered, a health and wellness podcast where I share my personal journey of health and healing, tips for mental and physical health, interviews with health and wellness experts and those bold enough and vulnerable enough to share their own journeys to empower you to succeed in yours. We know that life can be rewarding. It can also be challenging. It has its ups and downs, highs and lows. I learned that with a strong mind and a fit body, you are better able to grow through and grow from whatever life throws your way. My goal is to share journeys of health and wellness, as well as tips and information from extraordinary people all around the world to help you live an empowered life. My guest, Dr. Nakia Baylis, is the president and CEO of the Village Network of Battle Creek, a coalition of nonprofits led by people of color in West Michigan. In this role, Dr. Baylis oversees the development and execution of strategic planning, partnerships, and grant administration for the organization. Dr. Baylis is a proud graduate of Western Michigan University, where she earned her bachelor's in applied liberal arts, master's in educational leadership, and Ph.D. in evaluation, measurement, and research. In this episode, Dr. Baylis discusses her journey from teaching to community building, driven by the challenges faced by her elementary students. The organization focuses on sustainable change, resource equity, and cultural restoration, particularly for Black, Latino, and Burmese communities. Dr. Baylis emphasizes the importance of understanding one's why and building authentic relationships. She highlights resource constraints and the need for systemic change, advocating for inclusive policies and practices. Dr. Baylis also calls for collective action, urging individuals to vote, engage with legislators, and support advocacy organizations to drive meaningful change. I hope you enjoy the episode. Dr. Baylis, you are the CEO of the Village Network of Battle Creek, coalition of nonprofits led by people of color that serve the Black, Latino, and Burmese communities in West Michigan. What can you tell me about the work that you do in West Michigan?
Well, absolutely. Happy to speak about our work. Our work is really to support the building of connections. That's why we call it the network. We were intentional about our name. We believe that it does take a village to do the work that we do. We really work for sustainable change that closes resource, wealth, and class gaps, and supports cultural restoration.
Perfect. Now, after doing my radio show for 5 years, and I would say even during the first few months of my podcast, I have recognized that CEOs and founders of community organizations get involved and are drawn to their work due to personal experience, a passion, a call that they feel has been placed on their life. How did you get involved in this work? What drew you to it?
Oh, goodness. It's funny because I just had a meeting earlier that we were talking a little bit about that. And I was sharing how I started out as a teacher. And I started out as a teacher in elementary, and I taught in inner city schools. And really, it was seeing the barriers that the children and my students and their families, what they were going through. And it's interesting because there were three teachers, myself and two others that came out of teaching and went into community building work as a result of our experiences at that school and teaching because of what we experienced. And for me, it was really, although I'm a Black woman and certainly have experienced racism and barriers and challenges throughout my life, I do come from a family that has valued education. And so I have experienced some privileges as well, right? And I acknowledge those privileges. And so there were some experiences that I had as a teacher in seeing some of my students, some of the challenges that my students and their families were navigating that opened my eyes to some things that were veiled to me, as I was coming up. And so through that, I recognized the need for policy change and systems change work. And so that really moved me to go back to school to study organizational analysis, and research measurement and evaluation to be able to do the work for systems change and policy change, to get into really shifting how we do the work that we do in community building, specifically when it comes to economic justice work and the destruction of classism.
Wow. It's interesting. I don't come across many individuals like yourself that were on one trajectory and like literally shifted drastically and had to go back to school. And the reason why it really resonates with me is because I did the exact same thing. I mean, I had gone to school, gotten a degree, undergraduate degree, then I had gotten a master's, and then I went back to school and received another degree. And it was one of those things I just felt compelled to serve the people that I was serving at that time in a much different way, in a much better way. And I do believe that once you have that inkling, that feeling that you need to do more, I think even though it may be difficult to do it, like the actual process, I think it's something that you feel like you have to do.
Absolutely. I'm definitely purpose-driven in my work. Mm-hmm. And I actually use that as a catalyst for the work, right? I believe that when people understand their why, then they show up differently when they have access to different opportunities as well. And so it changes how you engage when you know your why. And oftentimes, people don't necessarily understand or know what their why is. And so that has a tendency to stunt our growth a bit. Mm-hmm. And one of my passions is really to support the opportunity for everyone to experience privilege and to get from indignity to privilege, right? And so, and for systems and people that are currently very privileged to understand that by including everybody, that you don't lose your privilege. You don't lose your privilege, and you don't even have to share your power, because everybody has power. It's that everybody doesn't understand how to activate their power. And so, I have a passion for helping people to activate the tools, to pick up the tools and add it to their toolkit, and then learn how to use those tools in their toolbox to activate their power, so that they can live a life of privilege.
I get that. Well, that's why my show is called Empowered. And it's interesting because my whole platform is built on that concept and understanding that, it's funny because when people think about empowered, I don't know that many people understand that it's giving yourself the power and authority to do something. Yeah. And that was why it's such a significant word for me, and why really pretty much a lot of things that I do are kind of built on that whole concept, is because you may have certain tools and resources, but if you don't know how to use those tools and resources, then you're not going to be able to be effective in your life, and you're definitely not going to be able to be impactful on the other people around you and those people within your community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you understand your why differently, the way that you show up with those tools changes profoundly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't think that many people understand how important it is to understand your why. And if you don't know your why for doing something, I actually would really encourage you to create time and space to find out, even if your why is just, what is your why right now in your life? And understand that your why might change, because I think the why is what's going to motivate you during the difficult times. The why is going to do the thing, is going to be the thing that's going to drive you. The why is going to make you, quite honestly, it's going to help you empower others to help you in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. Because if you don't know why you're doing something, you definitely are not going to be able to get other people involved in your journey.
Oh, yes. Yes. You just said a mouthful right there, because I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and those that came before me in activism and empowerment. And, I know that they tired. I know that they got weary, and I get weary in this work sometimes, oftentimes. And, you have to understand systems don't want to change. They're terrified of change, because they think that it means that they're going to lose their power. They think that it means that they will lose their privilege. They don't understand that it doesn't mean that they lose their power and their privilege. It just means that others gain power and privilege as well. And that it is, that it just means that we all have some power and some privilege. Right. And so, it's my why that keeps me going when I get very, very weary. It's my why that reminds me why I do this work.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of the work, one of the things that I would say is I have definitely learned that even with purpose and passion, a call, that missions and visions are not easily achieved and that they come with challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced with the Village Network and its partners?
Oh, goodness. Resources. There's a constant battle and push to gain the necessary resources to do this work, because of the time and the capacity that it takes to be on the ground, to do this work authentically. When you're talking about rebuilding dignity and people that have lost their dignity due to systemic disenfranchisement, right? When you're talking about going in and changing systems that are rooted in antiquated white supremacy, when you're talking about changing policies that are rooted in antiquated white supremacy, that requires a level of time and capacity that goes well beyond what is normal for quality work-life balance for most people. And so having the amount of resources necessary to do this work well is exuberant. Having the support in terms of technical supports that are necessary to show up for the people when they need that support. We're talking about going into community and showing up for people when they're in the middle of crises. Sometimes that means we're showing up at a hospital at 2:00 in the morning with a family that is in crisis because a loved one has been shot or murdered. That means that we're showing up in community when a community is in crisis. That means that we're showing up when a community is in the middle of a situation where there is development happening in their community and they have not been informed, looped in, included. And it is going to impact their property values. It is going to impact their way of living. It is going to impact how their children maneuver to and from schools. So it is critical that we continue to achieve, maintain, and receive a level of resources, and not just in financial resources, but in connection to people resources as well, that supports what we're doing. And oftentimes the work that we're doing, this is work that doesn't show up in your typical reports, your grant reports. This is work that's not going to be reported on the news, right? When we're holding the hands of our youth as they're struggling with a home situation, so that they can make it through the next day at school. These are things that don't get reported in our grant reports. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the level of time and capacity that that is required to do this work well is beyond measure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can completely understand that. You mentioned a lot of things that I would say that many people even know to think about. Like when you see development, you may be thinking, oh, wow, this is going to make it easier for me to get to work. You may not think about how it's impacted the neighborhood where that new development is taking place. And I don't know if you had not said it that I haven't thought about that for a while. The impact that those decisions have. So from the outside, you may think that you're positively impacting a community because, you're increasing the value of that community. But if those individuals that live within the community have not been part of that conversation, I have learned as a therapist, often what appears on the outside is not exactly what's going on the inside a community or inside individuals. And if you're not part of the conversation, you make a decision based on limited information, it may be the wrong decision. And if you're not mindful of the impact that the decision has on other people, it can have a significant detrimental impact. And you mentioned something that really kind of resonated with me when you talk about holding the hand of a student who's has something going on at home. I remember being one of those students. I remember having something really horrible happen the night before I had gone to school. Mm-hmm. And we were doing a project, I think it was like a lab. And so we were working on dissecting a frog. But in my mind and everything that had happened the night before, I was so traumatized by what had gone on the night before that when I showed up at school, I was not there. And I can vividly remember, I see myself standing in the middle of the classroom. I'm not doing anything. I'm not participating. I'm not really talking to anybody. And the teacher never asked, are you okay? What's wrong? I just got an F, on that lab, and I walked out. And I remember that. And I am a lot older. And I can see myself vividly. But understanding that you have an organization that as a whole can look at how a decision from the state or whoever decides to develop a community, how that may impact the people in a community from the outside, on a large scale. But then also think about the student, that one student that may have had a difficult time and needs their hand to be held, or a family at a hospital that is dealing with someone that's being shot and being able to provide support. I love that. And thank you. Thank you for the work, and thank your team for stepping up and providing a much needed service.
Thank you. Thank you. It's critical. We've stepped in and advocated even when, I can think of just recently, well, not too long ago, there was a situation where there was a child care licensing issue, and we advocated on behalf of an organization that, the state was going to shut them down within 24 hours. That would have impacted hundreds of Black and brown children and their families. And those children were coming to that organization to eat after school. Some of those children, that may have been their only meal before they returned to school the next day. That was their mentors were at that organization, their family. They considered those mentors, the people that they engaged with at that organization, that was their family. And so, stepping in and mitigating quickly to resolve that situation, to ensure that there was no shutdown, to support making sure that they did not lose millions in funding from their other funders as a result of quite frankly, what I would equate to an interpretation issue, quite frankly. And stepping in to say, hold on a second. This cannot happen. We can work through this together. We can do better together. Let's figure this out. Let's work through this. Let's navigate this with grace and humility. Let's recognize the humanity in this situation, and let's not misinterpret the policy. Let's not misinterpret this state statute just because of the personnel. The state personnel has changed, right? And then let's furthermore ensure that no harm comes to any other organizations in the community that are providing that, quite frankly, that last line of defense as supplemental support to our education system, particularly in our communities of color. That can't happen. That cannot happen. Our children are falling behind, and it's not because they're not smart enough. It's not because they lack the intelligence. It is because they're coming to school with their backpacks full of trauma. Just as you just shared, right? You went into that classroom with trauma. And our children are going into these classrooms with their backpacks full of trauma. And unfortunately, we have teachers that are not unpacking that trauma so that they have the capacity to take in learning. And that's a shame. And so our work really is to support economic, social, and education systems in recognizing you have to relationship better. You have to unpack you have to recognize that there's trauma in our communities of color because of systemic inequities that are deeply rooted in antiquated white supremacy. You have to acknowledge that. And then you have to help us deconstruct that. You have to help us just kind of destroy that. There's no other way to say it, right? And work through that differently, because we can do better together. And it actually benefits the entire community. And from an economic standpoint, it benefits everyone.
Yeah. You know, I wonder if, we're going to get into this about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I do believe that some of the issues that we have are because people don't understand the paths and the journeys of other people that don't look like themselves. And I don't know that you can fully understand unless you have direct experience with individuals. Otherwise, it's what you assume or the assumptions that you make, the perceptions that you have, which are often incorrect. And I think that is a significant issue because, unfortunately, and I'm connecting this to the trauma that we spoke of, and then I'll go back to the diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're going to start to talk about. I do believe that if you are a teacher, an educator, a person within the school system, and you are unaware of the type of traumas that your population that you're educating are typically exposed to, if you don't know how to ask the right questions or to provide or create an environment where kids can openly express themselves and be able to tell you what is happening in their lives, so that you're able to not take the role of a therapist or take the role of a mental health professional or someone that would specialize in trauma interventions and be able to address those needs. But you do need to know enough that you don't do harm and enough that you are able to create a safe space for that student to maybe take off that backpack for a moment and be able to be educated, and then be able to identify something may be going on with that child. And maybe I need to help them carry that backpack and direct them to someone where I pass off the backpack and say, this child is struggling. Let's help them carry this trauma. Let's help them deal with this trauma so that when the student comes back to the classroom, it's a lot lighter, if not empty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I taught at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids for a while, and I taught pre-service teachers. And that was the first thing that I would teach my pre-service teachers, is that you cannot teach a student anything, any subject matter, until and unless you have unpacked whatever they're bringing into that classroom. They're bringing something into that classroom in those backpacks that you cannot see. And the only way that you can do that is to build a relationship, an authentic relationship with each one of your students. That's the only way you're going to find out what it is they're bringing into your classroom. But you will not be able to teach them a single thing until you have done that. Build a relationship with them to understand what it is they're bringing into the classroom that you cannot see. That's where you start to understand what traumas they're bringing in to that classroom, and begin to be able to unpack some of that, and then begin, to your point, to make those connections, to say, okay, let me connect you with, let me make sure that I provide this resource to you, right? And do so in a way that is safe, in a way that is comfortable for that student. And you can't do that if you haven't built a relationship, an authentic relationship with that student.
You know, it's interesting. Something just clicked for me that you said. I now realize why, for me, one of the significant ways I was able to deal with my trauma was because I established a relationship with my track coaches. And I did have a couple really significant teachers who really did see me and create time and space for me to talk to them. Not only like my geometry teacher, bless her heart, Miss Sims. I do remember her. She would meet with me after class, after school, and I would go in and get extra help. And what was amazing between my track coach and between Miss Sims, I want to say by the time I was a high school student, and even in my junior year, I was getting like all A's in class. And it was amazing. And you just connected to me. You just made it clear to me why that was. It was because I had a relationship. I had established relationships with some really key people. And that allowed me to have that space for healing. I love it.
That's the key right there. That's why our work takes so much time and capacity, because we build authentic relationships with residents. We build authentic relationships with the people in our community, because number one, we want them to not just feel seen and heard. We want them to know that they are seen and heard, and be engaged, and be really in partnership, walking alongside of us. Understand that we built this work with and for them. This is not prescriptive work. We're building this with them, for them. Because we're part of them.
I'm sorry, say that.
I was saying, because we're part of them. We're them. We are a part of the communities that we are serving. So, it is us together. We're in this together.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing I think that it's lacking, I would say, in organizations, unless there is a intentional emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, is because you are not going to feel together. You're not going to feel connected with someone that is different from you unless it's intentional. And so with that, let's talk about that, because in 2020, after the death of George Floyd, we saw major government entities, foundations, and businesses make commitments to advancing equity. But recently, we've seen some of those same companies kind of walk away from those commitments and actually been decreasing support for the DEI initiatives For instance, there's been a trend of rollbacks to diversity, equity, inclusion programs at large companies such as Lowe's, Ford. When you hear news like that, what message does that send? Because we can't feel together with somebody if there's no intentional actions to make sure we understand the experiences of people that are not like us.
Absolutely. Well, I think it sends the message, it's additional trauma on top of trauma, right? It's traumatizing. And so what I do is I look at, okay, are you building it in differently? Are you internalizing your DEI work differently? And what I have found, now I will say this, I have found that some companies are internalizing it differently. What they're doing is they're building it into their entire infrastructure, and it's becoming part of who they are as an anti-racist organization. Some companies, however, some organizations are not. They're simply putting it away and saying, we're no longer committed to this. We're an organization that is looking to hold systems and organizations accountable for the commitments that they made, particularly through the pandemic when, disparities and that realization of the disparity gaps was at its highest, at its peak. The acknowledgement of disparity gaps was at its peak, and we really did see a lot of commitments kind of come to the forefront, right? And so we are going back and saying, hold on a second. You made some commitments to people that we really want to make sure that you're continuing to uphold. And so show us where in your business plan, where in your infrastructure, you are continuing to manifest these commitments. If you do roll back your DEI in terms of calling it out or putting it as a separate component of your company or your organization, are you internalizing it in such a way that it's becoming part of who the company is in its entirety, right? Which is a good thing. Now we're embracing that wholeheartedly. We want to partner with you because that is true alignment. That means that you have gone beyond simply calling it out and being moving into that ally space. Now you're moving into accomplice space. So I want to highlight your work. I don't want to call you out in a negative way. I want to call you out as an accomplice in terms of partnership, right? But if you are not, then we need to have a different type of conversation. We need to sit down and talk about where you're recognizing this is a humanitarian issue. And while I recognize that federal funding and state funding may now not recognize the delineation of race as a priority area, let's just say what it is, right? I want to know that you recognize it as a barrier for people that are either part of your consumer base and part of your workforce, right? And so how are you creating opportunities? How are you creating programs and services? How are you creating resources that acknowledges all of humanity? And now, so you can call it what you want to call it. We can call it pies in the skies. We can call it stripes and polka dots. I really don't care what you want to call it, but I want to know that you are recognizing all of humanity. And this is a humanitarian issue because people are people, but you have to recognize that some people, because of policies and systems being rooted and being built to systemically oppress very particular people, that there has to be some maneuver, some leverage points that are put in place to mitigate those things.
Yeah. Now, in the final couple questions, one of the things that I want to ask you, I think this is the perfect time to ask this, because I imagine with the trend of rollbacks at numerous organizations that the individuals, because we've really focused on the companies and the organizations that maybe had those initiatives that have either ingrained them into how they run their organization or perhaps have diverted away from that. But at the end of the day, there are people within those that are individuals of those marginalized communities. And I'm sure that they're concerned with the changes and changing attitudes and behaviors. So what advice would you give to someone who is being harmed psychologically by this and worried about where they stand within an organization that perhaps has diverted away from that?
Absolutely. Well, number one, I would say reach out to your nearest advocacy organization. We're an advocacy organization. You know, when people reach out to us and highlight issues of concern to us, we immediately begin investigating, because those are the issues that we want to address, right? We want to address the things that are impacting people that have been systemically marginalized, the most, systemically, chronically, and historically marginalized people. Those are the people that we advocate on behalf of. That's what our work is meant to support and to uplift and to bring from indignified to privileged, to make sure that there are pathways for economic power, to make sure that there are opportunities for mobility, economic mobility, right? And so if you are a person that is being impacted by an organization or a company that is further traumatizing you, reach out to your nearest advocacy organization. That's their work. That's what they are designed to do, is to step out in the forefront and represent and support you in that way.
Okay. As we come to the end, any final thoughts that you would like to share with those who are going to be listening to your interview?
Yes, vote. That's the other thing. Vote. Come on, y'all. Make sure that you get out and vote. Also, make sure that you're lifting your voice to your legislators, to your current legislators, right? I think that that's important, because I think that we can shift some things as well if we collectively, if there are lots of voices reaching out to our policymakers and saying, this isn't sitting well with us. This doesn't work for us. I think that makes a huge difference. But again, I would also do that with your advocacy organizations, because they will help to mobilize those voices in a way that has collective power. So I think that that's critical. We have got to activate our collective power, our individual power, and our collective power. It's a both and approach to situations that are stunting our ability to see change, to experience and navigate change in a particular way. So, voting, use your voice, bring voice to power, in every opportunity that is available. And I think that, by again, voting, by lifting up your concerns to your legislators, by contacting your local advocacy organizations, by getting involved, serving on boards and committees that govern decision making with regard to policies that are impacting you, that are supporting the companies that you work for. I'm just throwing some things out there. When you start to impact folks' money and their bottom line, then change is typically going to happen a whole lot faster. So, and I think that companies need to recognize too that when you're traumatizing your workforce and people that quite often make up your largest consumer population, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You're doing your own self a disservice. And so I would encourage companies to think about that a little deeper, a little better, and do some do some different things as they think about how to honor all of humanity.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you so much for all that you have done and all that I know in my heart and soul and spirit that you will continue to do. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to share your purpose and passion with me. I really, really appreciate it. I am excited that I had the opportunity to learn about the work that you have done and that you're doing. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for stepping out and taking charge and being a catalyst of necessary change.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, always a pleasure to share this work and again, meet another sister in this work and continuing to empower others. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for listening to Empowerment with Angela T. Moore. Feel free to share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. New episodes come out weekly. Follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.